Hello, my darlings and darklings. Welcome to the Simply Witchery podcast. I'm your host, Lethe, and together we're going to explore witchery, ritual, the divine, and magic of all sorts. This week, I'm answering your questions about shadow work. We talk about shadow work in therapy, how to know when you're finished with an aspect, and a whole lot more. Then we move on to the meditation station, where I talk about the last meditation in my Tarot Affirmation Meditation series. After that, in Magic and Me, I discuss spell writing. Then finally, I do a reading for the collective and for a lucky listener. Stay tuned! Before we jump into your questions about shadow work, I want to remind you all that I am not a mental health care professional. I can give you my best advice, but you should never go against the recommendation of your therapist or doctor because of what I say. Also, I'm sorry if I mispronounce any of your usernames. I'm really bad at that, and Google only helps so much. Alright, that said, let's get into it. My first question comes from Instagram. They ask, what kind of decks are needed? The short answer is that you don't need tarot at all to do shadow work. The only requirements for shadow work is a willingness to be honest, even when it hurts, and a desire to change the way things are. Tarot is a great tool to have when doing this kind of work, but it's not something you have to have. If you are going to use tarot, I would recommend a deck that you know well and have used before. There's nothing wrong with using a new deck, but I think you'll get a better read on your shadow with a deck whose attitude and energy you understand. Thank you for your question. Good luck with your practice. Next, from Tumblr, the Taiga Witch asks, I need help with drawing the line between stuff I can do on myself and stuff I should do with my therapist. Got any tips? I love this question. I think it's super important to consider this when you're going through shadow work and working with a therapist. I definitely have some tips for you. My first one is pay attention to what aspects of your shadow are wrapped up in important coping mechanisms for you. Integrating your shadow is important, but you need to make sure that you have a healthy coping mechanism ready to replace the one that you are removing. Without that plan, you could just replace it with something equally as unhealthy, or trigger yourself without meaning to. So take anything that's related to your coping mechanisms to your therapist. Another thing to think about is your triggers and how your triggers are wrapped up in your shadow. If a particular area of your shadow is rooted in a trigger, take it to your therapist. We are the ones that have to wrestle with our triggers, but it's important to have support while we do it, and that's also part of the point of having a therapist. It's their literal job to support you as you work on triggers. I would liken this to exposure therapy, and you should always do that with a qualified therapist. I do want to clarify here that I do mean things that are big triggers for you. I personally have a lot of things that trigger me, but not in a huge way that keeps me from functioning as normal. Well, what passes for normal as I work on me anyway. You may want to take these smaller triggers to your therapist as well, but that I think is ultimately up to you and your intuition. Things that trigger you in a big way and cause things like panic attacks or disassociation and things like that should definitely be taken to your therapist. My next two tips will help you decide if you take those smaller triggers to your therapist. If you're struggling with getting distance from a particular aspect of your shadow so that you can properly examine it and pull on its threads so that you can understand it, then take it to your therapist and have them coach you through the process or give you some insight or perspective on it from the outside point of view. In a similar vein, if you're struggling with how to integrate a part of your shadow into your consciousness, take it to your therapist and ask them to help you come up with a practical strategy to implement the things you've learned in a meaningful way. This could look like coaching you through rewriting your self-talk, figuring out how to build new habits in a way you can stick to, and other things like that. My next tip is really just a small thing to keep in mind as you're deciding. This was really important for me when I was seeing a therapist and doing shadow work. I realized that I was asking myself, can I do this by myself? When the real question should have been, do I want to or have to do this by myself? Some parts of your shadow will feel small to you, so small that your ego will try to convince you that you can totally handle it by yourself, and it's very possible that you could do it on your own. The thing is, you shouldn't have to do everything by yourself. We have doctors to help us heal. No one would just hand a victim of a bullet wound some sutures and painkillers and say, "You've totally got this, man. I'll be over here while you figure this out." There will be parts of your shadow that you need to tackle on your own, but it's not all on you to figure everything out. Humans are communal creatures. We need the people around us to support us in meaningful ways, and your therapist is a part of that community for you. Try to keep all that in mind as you consider your options. Those are all my tips for you. Good luck with your shadow work and therapy both, and thank you for sending in your question. My next question is from Instagram, and Gemini with the Taurus moon asks a couple of different questions. I covered the others in the last 2 episodes, so we're going to focus on this one. How do you know when you're done working on it? This answer might be frustrating for you and for a lot of people, and I'm sorry about that. Shadow work never really ends. It's a lifelong journey. You may come to a point with one aspect where you feel like you can put it down, but as you work on other areas, you'll almost always cycle back to the places you've been before and discover new truths about yourself. Your shadow is a part of you, and you can't and shouldn't try to get rid of it. It's like a good lasagna with a lot of layers, and you could work on it for the rest of your life and never peel them all back. I will, however, tell you that your intuition will tell you when it's time to put something down for the time being. When you feel stuck or when you feel like you haven't made any progress for a while, move on and take a look at some other aspect that you'd like to address, or take some time off of shadow work altogether to do some light work and self-care. This will prevent you from getting stagnant in your work and will keep you from hyper-focusing on any one aspect too. I hope that gave you some clarity. Good luck with your practice and your work, my dear, and thank you for sending in your question. For my third question, we're going back to Tumblr, and Iridescent Skies asks, I've been recording many of my strong feelings in a journal and just kind of taking note of them. Aside from looking for patterns, is there anything else I should be doing with this information? Thank you. You're welcome, and thank you for sending in your question. This one really got me thinking, and I have a couple of tips for you. Your journaling can really help you articulate what you're feeling in a concise way and help you lay out your triggers or difficulties for yourself as well as for others so that others can support you. It can also help you stand up to people who take advantage of your difficulties and triggers. It will also help you avoid triggers while you work on an aspect of your shadow so that you can tackle it effectively. It's very hard to deal with a trigger when you're in the midst of it, and so avoidance is sometimes necessary. Just don't avoid them forever. Another tip I have for you is you should also look at how your feelings have changed over time. If you're only recording your negative emotions, you're only writing down half the story. Pay attention to the good as well, so that when you look back, you can see how your happiness has grown and your pain has lessened. This really helps me stay motivated because I like being able to see results laid out in front of me. Thanks again for sending in your question. Good luck with everything you do. And that's all the questions that I have time for today. Thank you everyone for sending them in. They were all really good. This week's meditation is the last in my Tarot Affirmation series, and it's the meditation for the Suit of Swords. The swords represent the element of air in the Minor Arcana. This suit represents our mental and logical struggles and triumphs as we move through our life. I really wanted to write affirmations to support mental health and the ability to use our strength of mind and will to triumph over mental blocks in life. I also wanted to spotlight the use of common sense in everyday life and showcase the blessings that using it can bring. This meditation is great to listen to when you feel mentally exhausted and need a boost in your confidence. Give it a listen and let me know what you think. You can find it wherever you're listening to this podcast and also on the Simply Witchery YouTube channel. You might not see another meditation for a few weeks. I'm working on where I want to go with this section next. So if you don't see a meditation station in the podcast for a couple of weeks, that's why. There may also be a gap as I only upload episodes of the podcast every other week and do meditations on my off weeks. So if you don't see anything in the feed next week, don't worry about it. New things are coming. This week in Magic and Me, I want to talk about the basics of spell writing. I have been feeling led to get back into writing spells, and I thought I'd lay out my process for you all. The first step is to decide what your intent is. The general rule of thumb is that the more specific you are, the more likely you are to get what you ask for. But I personally like to leave the door open for the universe to surprise me. I trust the source to be on my side, and I also trust it to have a larger view of life than I have. I like to leave space in my spell work for something better than what I ask for to come into my life. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide which school of practice you ascribe to. Whichever way you go with how specific you get with your intent, setting your intent is the most important part of spellcrafting. You can do spell work with nothing but intent. Everything else is optional, so it's very important that you have a strong intention. I often write out my intent and slowly refine it so that I can be clear as I craft a spell around the intent. The next thing you need to do is decide what kind of spell you'd like to create. I'm all about simple witchery, hence the name of my business, so I always look around me and see what I have on hand and use those things to create a spell. There is nothing wrong with painstakingly choosing ingredients and tools to create a spell and then going out and getting them all. In fact, if you have the finances, drive, and calling to do so, it can be an incredibly powerful and affirming thing. There also is nothing more or less powerful in keeping your magic simple. We all should do as we are able in our own practices. My school of crafting simple magic with what I have on hand leads me to create a lot of candle spells. My candles are almost always used in tandem with sigils, salts, and magic waters. I always have these things on hand as they are also a part of my deity worship and just things I always have on hand in my mundane pantry. I also pick up a lot of things on my walks in nature and use them in my spell work. I use a lot of cool river rocks in my spells. There are also a lot of people who provide herbs, crystals, and other tools that you can buy from and then craft your spells around the things you purchase. Once your tools and ingredients are selected, it's time to lay out your spell. I like to write down the steps I plan to take so that I have a guide to follow during my spell work. It's also perfectly acceptable to improvise as you go. It just depends on what you want and need from your practice. Regardless of whether you improvise or write it out beforehand, I think it's important to write a summary of the spell once it's complete so that you can look back on it when you create future spells. This way, you can keep track of what you did and didn't like about the spells you've done and become a better spell writer every time you create a spell. Those are the basics of spell writing. If you'd like to check out some of the spells I've created, you can see them on the Simply Witchery Tumblr and Waterfall. Going forward, I'll be posting a new spell every Saturday on my website. This week's spell is called Bless and will go live tomorrow, June 1st. There will be links in the show notes, the outro of this episode, and on the link tree on all my social media accounts. Let me know what you think. Welcome to Tarot Time, everyone. This week, I felt led to draw 4 cards for the collective from the Wildwood Tarot. I pulled the 2 of Arrows, 5 of Vessels, King of Stones, and 6 of Arrows. There are 2 messages in the cards for the collective this week. The first is from the 2 of Arrows and 5 of Vessels. The 2 of Arrows depicts a blindfolded woman holding 2 arrows crossed at her chest. She sits on a throne carved from stone. Above her floats a balance scale. The left scale holds a feather, and the right holds a pile of golden coins. Under her foot is a bow. The 5 of Vessels depicts a woman clothed in a fine green dress. In one hand she holds a staff, and in the other a rattle. She dances under the stars in the dark of night in the center of a 5-pointed star. A candle burns bright in a bowl in each point of the star. These cards remind the collective that joy flows to us easily when we are calm and balanced. Balance comes when we cultivate understanding and a true inner joy that cannot be shaken by the ebb and flow of mere happiness. Lean into your intuition this week and seek clarity on those things that are hidden from your sight. Once clarity comes, ask yourself if the areas of your life that you believe are balanced actually are, or if you've just settled for a bad deal because you don't believe you are worthy of more. The next pair is the King of Stones and 6 of Arrows. The King of Stones depicts a brown wolf in a snowy landscape. The wolf stands on the peak of a rock that juts out from the snow and howls up at the full moon above it. The 6 of Arrows is a picture of a swan-shaped boat with a yellow sail. On the sail, 5 arrows are painted with all their points pointing at the center of the sail. A hooded figure stands at the bow of the boat and confidently steers the boat away from the setting sun on the horizon. He heads past a craggy cliff behind which the full moon can be seen glowing in the sky. This pair brings a message of endurance through a transitional period. You have all the strength and power of the wolf, and you must also remember that the wolf is a pack animal. Trust in your own strength and ask for help when you need it as you nurture the changes that are entering into your life. As you seek balance on the advice of the other pair, pay particular attention to the balance between being self-sufficient and allowing yourself to lean on others. These two things are not mutually exclusive. I hope these messages reach you where you are in this moment and breathe life and light into you. Moving on to this week's listener question. This week's question comes from Tumblr, and they ask, I was hoping to place Persephone on my altar for my summer solstice decor, but she's the goddess of spring, not summer. Would this still work, or am I risking offense? I first got an intuitive answer. Part of it is my intuition, and part of it is from Persephone. Then I'll read the cards I pulled for you as well. From Persephone, I got the message that she doesn't mind being included on your summer altar. In fact, she wouldn't mind being included in some way in your altar for all the seasons. She also just likes being honored, and so however you want to do that is cool with her. My personal intuition and my personal experience with her says that while she is the goddess of spring, she also represents the change in the seasons, as it's her descent into the underworld that brings winter. That's why I've always felt it's right to honor her whenever the seasons change. Take this intuitive answer or leave it depending on what resonates with you. Just because something is right and true for me doesn't make it right or true for you. If it feels true for you, run with it, and if not, let it go. Now on to the cards I drew for you. I pulled 2 cards from the Wild Unknown Tarot, the 7 of Cups and the World. The 7 of Cups depicts 2 columns of 3 cups floating in the sky. A 7th cup floats upside down in between the 2 columns. The moon shines in the dark night sky at the top of the card, and the sun glows in the white background at the base. The World depicts a rainbow circle surrounding a scaled circle. Flowers grow from the scales towards the light that glows from the center of the cards. Stars shine in the sky surrounding the circles. These cards ask you to trust yourself when you consider these kinds of questions in the future. There are plenty of different paths that you could walk down to get to the great, complete oneness represented in the world. If you want to do something, follow that instinct. Making mistakes is a part of the journey, and instead of fearing them, embrace the fact that they'll happen and cultivate an attitude of gratitude towards the lessons they will teach you. The divine is with you and won't hold your humanity against you. I hope that helps guide you and resonates with you. Good luck with everything, and thank you for sending in your question. That's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and ratings and reviews would be greatly appreciated. If you would like a transcript of the episode, please visit our blog at simplywitchery.wordpress.com. The music in this episode is Where Was I by Lee Rosevere. If you'd like to receive a tarot reading for yourself on a future episode, you can contact Simply Witchery by direct message on Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, Waterfall, and YouTube. You can also email me at simplywitchery@gmail.com. Feel free to answer any questions I've posed in this episode, or to ask me a question of your own. All my love to each and every one of you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!